Hey guys, today we're going to show you how to rebuild a late model KYB shock. You're going to find these on Yamahas, Kawasaki's, Suzuki's, whatever you have, refer to your model specific manual. Throughout the process, we're showing you how to replace a leaky seal, and we're going to show you just how to change out that fluid. You should be changing out the fluid at least every 40 hours, but you can refer to your manual for specs on that. So all that said, let's get into it. To get this done, we have some common hand tools. Things I want to point out are we have a metric measuring tape. You'll need a seal head setting tool. We've got a nitrogen needle. Some of these are going to have a Schrader valve, so depending on which shock you have, you may or may not need that. A clip pick tool is going to make the job way easier. Then we have a digital suspension pump. I'd also recommend having a seal bullet. That's going to save your seal as you install it. And then as far as parts go, you need a way to clean everything up. So we've got the Tusk First Line Contact Cleaner, and then we've got a complete seal head. You can buy individual seals, bushings, different brands of seal heads. We've got all that stuff on our website. You're going to need some light shock oil. So the range on that, you're going to see some bottles are going to say 2.5, some give a range from 2.5 to 5. You're also going to want some thread locker and some seal grease. Now, again, if you need any parts for this build or special tools, you can find that stuff on our website by clicking the link in the description below. Now to remove the shock, it's going to look a little bit different from bike to bike. For us, we need to remove our seat. We're removing some screws and fasteners from the plastics. I'm going to pull the tank up, and I'm not going to disconnect the fuel line. I'm just going to spin this around. And then I can go ahead and remove the shock bolts and pull this shock out from the top. But if your bike looks a little bit different and you need some more guidance, you can always refer to your model specific service manual for more information. Now over at the bench, first thing we want to do is count our clickers so we can get them back to their original positions, and that's going to help with the bleeding process as we go back together. So with this, all you want to do is count the clicks clockwise all the way in until it lightly seats. I'm going to back this all the way out. And then up top, we've got the low speed compression clicker. All right, now for the high speed compression adjuster, that's going to be this blue outer ring, and we're just going to count complete turns with that. Now, if you want to make sure you get it back in the same spot, you can see we already have one punch mark on our shock on this compression assembly, but I don't have one that correlates to where this is actually at right now. So I'm going to use an auto centering punch. I'm going to line it up with that other punch mark, and then we can make sure we get it in the same location as it was before. So now I'm going to take my 17mm socket, count the turns. So we're about 3/4 of a turn. I'm going to back this all the way out. The next step is to remove your spring. There's two ways to do it. You can use a spring compressor or one on each side. Now, the easiest way for most people is just going to be to loosen the lock rings. We'll back those all the way off and then pull the spring off. If you're going that way, you need to measure the length of the spring. I recommend having a metric tape measure. So we're 269mm right there. And we're just measuring from a flat spot on top of the spring to a flat spot on the bottom. Next, we're going to be putting our shock into our vise with soft jaws. So we've got a few options on our website if you need some of these. I'm just clamping down on the eyelet, and if you're worried about anything getting scratched or scuffed, you can always use a rag in between your parts. And I'm going to use a little 6-in-1 on there to help these rings come off a little bit easier. And then all we have to do right here is rotate the spring, and that's going to rotate our adjuster. So you need to get that backed off until you have enough room to remove this retainer at the top. So with this, to get the retainer off, you're going to have to pull down on your shock bumper a little bit. That's going to allow us to remove that retainer. Then we have this locating collar. We'll pull that off. We've got the spring. And I'll just keep everything in the same orientation. And then to make things easier, these soft jaws, they have the little cutout. We're gonna take advantage of that. That's gonna hold the body, the shock body, a little more secure. Next, we have this cap at the bottom of the shock body. So we need to pop that up. You can use a punch on these little cutouts, or if you have a sharpened chisel, you can put that right at the seam and knock the cap up. All right, so with that popped up, you can see, even though we power washed our bike before we ever started, this thing's messy. So just to make sure I don't get dirt all over the internals of this as we take it apart, I'm gonna remove it from the vise and get this thing spruced up and ready for disassembly. The two main spots I'm gonna pay attention to are up by the seal head and by this bladder. Everything else you can use a rag and wipe it down with a little contact cleaner on there. All right, now that we are decently cleaned up, I'm gonna put the shock back in the vise. And before I take anything apart, I wanna make sure and just see if this thing is working correctly or not. And that way, if there's anything I need to pay attention to, I can. So I'm gonna press this all the way down. Let it extend all the way on its own. This shock is working correctly, but we're at the hours. We need to get some fresh fluid in there anyway, and we're gonna show you how to replace the seal at the same time. So with that said, I wanna get this cap out of my way. So I'm just gonna use a little zip tie, go around the shaft, we'll put that up. The next step is to remove your nitrogen pressure. We've got our nitrogen needle. On some of them, it's just gonna be a Schrader valve. So with this needle, we can now press on the Schrader. The next step is to press your reservoir cap down just a little bit to expose a circlip. That's gonna look a little bit different from shock to shock. If you have a Schrader valve sticking out the side, just be cautious. You don't wanna put any or place any impact on that and damage it. And with that, I'm sliding our shock down to the collars. I'm not clamping on any threads. You can also, again, clamp the eyelet if you need to. We're just using a socket and our dead blow hammer, and then we're just gonna tap this in. There we go. We've got that clip exposed enough to remove it. So with that out of the way, we still have a little bit of dirt in there. I'm gonna use some compressed air. And then you also wanna look down in here and make sure that nothing got dinged up. You wanna make sure there's no sharp edges that would tear your bladder when you pull it out. Now, if you do see any sharp edges, you can use a little bit of Scotch-Brite or emery cloth to clean that up, and then just make sure you clean it out. From here, to remove the bladder, one of the easiest ways to remove this is going to be to pressurize it up. And I'm gonna make sure I have a drain pan underneath, catch any extra oil. So you can see that raising up. I'm gonna try to leave this open so you can see, but it's not a bad idea to cover these edges with a rag. So you can see that got a little crooked at the top, so help straighten that out, and that's gonna remove the bladder. So with that, I wanna make sure I release that pressure now. And I only had about 12 pounds in there, just for reference. Okay, and then from here we can use our seal head setting tool, put it in there. I'm gonna use this cap to help press the seal head down. And it's the same thing, we're just going to expose a clip. And I'm gonna spray this out as well. I'm just gonna cover everything with a rag as I do it. We're just verifying we have any dirt out of there, and I'll go ahead and remove that clip. All right, then from here, I'm going to dump out this oil. Press that shock shaft in. I'm gonna set this back in my vise. Okay, then we're gonna pull that shock shaft out. This one was a little tough to pull up. Next, we're gonna disassemble the shock shaft. So I'm going to clamp this eyelet in my soft jaws. And then to remove this nut, it's gonna look a little different from bike to bike. So this nut is normally peened on, and if it's never been off, you need to grind the peen down, and that's gonna allow the nut to be removed. If not, you're gonna damage the shaft and the nut. So with this, there's two ways to do it. You can grind it at an angle until all of that mushroomed out area, until that's all gone. Or you can use a file, and you can file this sideways all the way around, and you can break the nut loose, and if the nut starts to bind up, you know you need to do more filing. That's probably the preferred method and the way you're gonna remove the least material. But you can see with ours, we already have the Racetech gold valves installed. So all that stuff's been done. All we need to do is remove this nut. So this is a new nut. It's got that red Loctite on there. Now before you remove anything, I recommend using a pick or a small screwdriver, something like that. I'm gonna remove this piston and the shim stacks all off as an assembly. We don't wanna mess up the order on any of that stuff. So we're going all the way down to that base plate, pull that off. And then right here, we've got the seal head assembly, which is what we're gonna be replacing. Then I'm gonna pull everything else off as well. You can see the shock bumper's starting to get old. It's changing colors. If you notice these cracking or deteriorating, you definitely want to get them replaced. This does affect the feel of the shock, especially in that lower portion of the travel. So if it's not in good condition, you want to get it replaced. Then we'll remove that cup, and from here we need to get everything cleaned up. So I'm just going to spray all the parts off with some contact cleaner and then lay everything out in order. Now, as you clean your parts, you want to make some inspections. So first off, with the shock body, I'm going to take a look around these grooves where our clips go. If you see any gouges or scratching that could damage an O-ring as it passes over, or your bladder, you want to get that smoothed out using some emery cloth or Scotch-Brite, and then get everything sprayed out really well. The other thing you want to do is look down inside at the anodizing, make sure that's not worn away. A lot of times if it is, you're going to see a gray metallic looking colored oil as it comes out. So pay attention to those kind of things. And then other than that, you just want to look at the shock body for any damage and make sure there's no cracks. Now for the bladder, I'm just going to wipe this off, and I'm going to look for any damage to the bladder itself. If you see any cuts or tears down by that sealing area, definitely get it replaced. And then since we have our Racetech gold valve, this piston ring band, this it separates and can come off. We just want to take a look at it, make sure it's in good condition. Normally these are just going to stay on your piston. Then these clips, we're going to be reusing them, so make sure they're wiped off. And if you buy a seal head, a lot of times it's going to come with a new clip. And then for the bumper, this thing's starting to look old. Now's the time to replace it. Then we'll just wipe the other parts off. Now for the shock shaft nut, we're going to be reusing this on ours, but if you filed one down, it's always a good idea to replace that nut. Now for the shock shaft, if you did have to file this down, make sure that you get any metal shavings off of here and the other parts. You want to clean those things up really well. So with that, we need to use our compressed air on one of those oil feed ports. And we're also going to spray it out with some contact cleaner. I'm just covering up one side with a finger while I do that. You might have to do that a couple times to get that passageway completely clean. Next, you want to take a look at these threads, make sure they're in good condition. You also want to take a look at the chrome surface, make sure it's not worn through, and verify the shock shaft is not bent. Then we can go ahead and finish spraying this off. And then the last thing with the shock shaft, if there's any really minor damage right here, you could clean it up with some emery cloth or some Scotch-Brite, but if it's very bad, you want to make sure you get this replaced. But from here, we can go ahead and reinstall this back into our vise. Now to put this back together, we've got our cup, bottom out bumper, and we've got that cap. Next, we're going to install our brand new seal head. So with this, I'm going to use a seal bullet, set that in place, and this is just going to help prevent cutting the new seals as we put the seal head on, and it's just going to eliminate going over that sharp edge. So to install the seal head, we're going to use a little bit of seal grease on our seals. We're going to apply some to that bushing as well, and then the O-ring on the outside. And that oil seal is right down in the middle on this. All right, we got everything lubed up. I'm going to put just a little bit of grease on the shaft and seal bullet, slide the seal down. Remove that bullet. Then we're going to install that piston, shim stack. I'm going to make sure I have no oil or grease on these threads. Next, you want to take your new nut and apply some high strength thread locker to it. This is the Stuck Nuts thread locker we're using. So I'm going to thread that on. I'm going to wipe off any excess thread locker. We're making sure we don't get any thread lock down that hole or anywhere it shouldn't be. And then to get this torqued, different bikes are going to have different specs. So refer to your manual or your DVS sheet if you did one of these Racetech Gold valves. Typically, you're going to be between 25 and 30 foot-pounds on this. Now we're going to remove this from the vise and set the shock body back in there. Now we're going to take our shock oil, we're going to fill up our reservoir, and going to fill it at least halfway up. Probably going to go about 3/4 on this. And I want some of this fluid to move over to the shock shaft side of the body. So one thing you can do, you can just let it flow through, but to help it out, you can tap on that reservoir. And then we're going to make sure that the reservoir is filled up enough that when we put our bladder in place, this is going to overflow. We've got our drain pan underneath too. All right, so you're just going to press that reservoir in until that groove is exposed for your clip. Go ahead and reinstall that. Should be able to hear it clip into place just like that. Just verify it's all the way down in its groove. Then from here, we're going to pump up the reservoir to 25 to 30 PSI. And this is just going to overextend the bladder a little bit. And that way we end up with the correct amount of oil when we're done. So as you do that, the bladder cap is obviously going to rise up, and you want to make sure it covers up that clip that we just installed. Next, we're going to fill up the shock body. We're going to go about 2 inches from the top here. Then for the shock shaft, you want to make sure you have that O-ring lubed up, as well as this piston ring. And if you have a stock shock, you might just be lubing up the piston ring only. So as you set this into place, make sure you have that piston ring fully compressed. And we're gonna work this into place. And then once we have this pushed down past that groove a little bit, I'm gonna top this off with oil. You wanna leave it about 10 millimeters from the top. And then we're gonna pump this up and down, and there's the bleed holes on the side of the shaft. You don't wanna expose those to air at any point from now on. So we're gonna press down on the shock shaft. That's gonna help bleed any air out. And as you pull up, make sure you pull up slow. And that's gonna help prevent any cavitation and help the bleeding process. And if you have a heavy compression shim stack, you can use a dead blow hammer. Give that a good hit, and it's gonna help bleed the air out. All right, now we're gonna pull the shock up as high as we can. Again, don't expose those two inlet ports. We're gonna top off the shock body with fluid. And from here, I'm ready to install that seal head. Now we're gonna lose a little fluid when we do this. And I'm gonna press this in as far as I can. Gonna get my seal head setting tool. So as soon as that O-ring hits, we're not gonna be able to go any further. So what we need to do is release some of this air pressure. That's going to allow me to push the seal head down. You want to expose that groove for the retaining clip. We had this new clip come with our seal head. Again, we'll make sure that is installed all the way and clipped into place. Next, you want to pressurize the bladder and make sure the seal head fully seats in its groove. And I've got a little bit of shock oil around here. I want to make sure I clean that off. And I'm going to trim off this mechanics helper. Next, I'm going to tap the cap into place. You've got a hole on each side of it. You want to line those up with the shock eyelets. And that way, if you get any moisture in here, one of those is going to be at the lowest point and drain that water out. Then from here, we're going to release the air pressure from our bladder, push down on the shock shaft all the way. And then I'm going to fill this up with 165 PSI of nitrogen. You can take this to your local shop to get that done if you need to. Now that we're filled with nitrogen, we just want to make sure everything works correctly. So we're going to pump this damping rod all the way down. Make sure it extends all the way on its own, which it does. If you see any dropouts or it doesn't extend all the way, you want to go back through and fix any mistakes. Make sure you have all the air bled out. Now, since we know that everything's good on ours, we're ready to reinstall our spring. Now, before we set the spring on, you want to make sure your adjuster is on the correct side of the shock. So we've got it on the same side as our compression adjuster. So I'm going to set the spring on same way we took it off. If you flip this over, the inside of this spring, it's going to be a smaller diameter, so it's not going to sit all the way down. Then we've got our collar. And I've got to push that bumper down just a little bit to get this spring retainer in place. And then from here, we can go ahead and set our preload. So we're back at 269. We can go ahead and reinstall our lock ring. Next, we're going to set our clickers and reinstall the shock back into the bike. As you reinstall the shock back onto the bike, make sure you have just a little bit of grease on the mounting bolts. And then we're going to torque the upper mounting bolt to 41 foot-pounds and the lower one to 39. After that, reinstall any removed hardware and covers along with your seat. All right, so there you have it. That's how you rebuild your late model KYB shock. If you have any questions, leave those down in the comments. And if you need any parts for your bike or special tools, you can find that stuff on our website. Click the link in the description below. Orders over $75 ship free. And if you want to see more helpful content like this, subscribe to our channel. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Thanks for watching.